So we just have a really short PowerPoint presentation that we're going to move through as a group. I think the main goal of this hour is to answer questions. So we're going to move through this as pretty quickly. It's just kind of making everybody aware of all the resources that are out there. So at the end of it, we're going to have this Q&A session. You can either submit your questions via the voice. You can just unmute yourself and ask your question. Or you can put it in the chat. Or if you want your question to be private, you can go ahead and send it to me through the chat, and I'll make sure that gets read if you want to do it in an anonymous way. And with that, we'll move on. I'm going to pass it off to Colleen. Do we have Colleen online? Okay. If not, I'll go ahead and take this one. So what we're going to do today is kind of.
Okay.
I got it, Mark. Don't worry.
No, go ahead.
What we're going to do today is kind of go over just a very high level of some of the impacts that COVID has had on the program. I'm going to do a welcome and introductions to everyone from the NSF online, a brief discussion and some guidance on kind of what's publicly available. And then always as a reminder, NSF has a coronavirus page where you can get a lot more detailed information. And then for everybody, this presentation will be posted on the IRPIC portal, so you can share it with your community if you have colleagues that weren't able to make it today. And then always, I think we're asking that just people contact their cognizant program officers with any questions or concerns that they have. I think we're all understanding that this is a really tough time, and I think it's everybody's desire to want to be available and to answer any questions that people might have. So with that, we're going to move to introductions. So first we'll start with Simon.
Hi, I'm Simon. I'm lead the Arctic group at NSF.
Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe Kittle. I'm a branch chief in NSF Division of Grants and Agreements, supporting the Directorate for Geosciences.
Thanks. Renee?
Hi, I'm Renee Crane. I'm a program manager with the Arctic Research Support and Logistics Program.
Roberto?
Hello, everyone. I direct the Arctic Observing Net program and also help out with navigating the Arctic and the long-term ecological research programs.
Pat Haggerty?
I'm also a program manager with the Research Support and Logistics Program.
Colleen Hafke?
Colleen is not on the line, so, but Colleen is a program director in Arctic Natural Sciences.
Okay. Erica Hill?
I am Erica Hill. I am program director for Arctic Social Sciences.
Jennifer Mercer?
Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Mercer. I am a program manager for Arctic Research Support and Logistics.
Frank Rack?
I'm also a program manager for Research Support and Logistics, responsible for Alaska and vessels.
Lisa Rome?
Good afternoon. This is Lisa Rome. I'm the Education Program Officer for the Arctic and Antarctic, so I take care of all things education. Thank you.
Mark?
Hi, I'm Mark Stiglitz, and I am one of the 2 program officers for Arctic Natural Sciences.
And Terry?
Hi everyone, my name is Terry Adillian. I'm a communications specialist and I support both Arctic and Antarctic in the Office of Polar Programs.
Great. Was there anyone I missed from NSF Online? Okay, so we'll move to the next slide, and which I think belongs to Mark.
All right, so so there are a couple of sites that you can go to, which is the first one being a very sort of high-level NSF site where they provide information on coronavirus and the impact of coronavirus on related to NSF and that level. At another level, the OPP website provides some information as well there about coronavirus, but it's a site that you should go to if you're looking for general announcements put out by the Office of Polar Programs. And that applies to both the Arctic and the Antarctic. Again, email your NSF program officer if you have any sort of questions. We do like you to email rather than just cold call first, especially if you want to discuss ideas about new projects. It gives us some time to think about it and discuss what the project may be amongst ourselves first. And finally, we encourage the PIs to strongly consider delaying their field work this season. You know, we're moving late into the season anyway, so many of you have already delayed your field work. So, and if you are thinking about going into the field, it would be very good to contact your program officer, especially if you have CPS support.
I think Erica.
We do want you to know that we are open for business in the sense that we are most of us are teleworking, but we are conducting business on a regular daily basis, very much as we would if everybody was in the building. It's easy to reach most of us via email, as Mark said, and we do all handle a lot of questions regarding COVID and fieldwork and prospective projects in the future. So we are reviewing proposals. We're accepting them just as usual. And it's important to know that we don't have any deadlines in the Arctic Sciences section. So that includes Arctic Natural Sciences, Arctic Social Sciences, the Arctic Observing Network, and the Arctic System Sciences program. All 4 of those programs are continuing to accept and review proposals. Do get in touch with us if you are, not only if you are currently a PI and have questions or concerns about COVID, but if you are planning to propose a project to us, we'd like you to consider how COVID might impact your work. So do reach out if you have questions about that or how to handle it in a proposal. COVID is basically on our radar every day. So reach out, ask us questions, and we'll get back to you. As Mark said, most of us are happy to talk to you on email and often set up teleconferences.
Thanks. I think Jen.
Yeah, so our goals remain the same as they have been throughout the pandemic, and it's really twofold. First is the health and safety of our program participants, anyone who is wanting to or needing to go into the Arctic. Tied closely with that is we're committed to preventing the introduction of COVID-19 to communities or research stations in the Arctic. So with that said, a few updates. Toolik Field Station and Utqiagvik in Alaska can and are supporting a limited number of researchers. And I think Frank is available to answer specific questions about that during the Q&A. We have not been supporting any research in Greenland. Greenland is actually closed. It was closed off to all visitors from outside of Greenland. Recently, it's opened up to just a handful of countries, and the US is not on that list of countries, citizens who are allowed into Greenland without going through an approval process. So other than continuing to operate Summit Station, we're operating the station in a limited capacity to maintain the ongoing scientific observations that are conducted there year-round. So anyone who is going into the field with NSF support must follow quarantine and testing protocols developed in conjunction with our Arctic support contractor, and they must comply with all levels of requirements ranging all the way from institutions up through state, regional, local, and tribal and national requirements if you're going outside of the United States. Research on vessels is proceeding in it has proceeded in July and is continuing to proceed in August, but that's also following very strict testing and quarantine protocols. So these things are take a lot of time to get into place and follow. And for looking forward, looking ahead to out years, we are considering each individual project and working with individual PIs to find ways to accomplish the original research goals in the future field season. So we're very interested in continuing those discussions.
And then Roberto?
Thanks, Kate. So I'll take a few moments to address our approaches and in some cases expectations with the focus on current awardees. So a core principle again is our commitment to using available flexibilities to support health, safety, and work of our sponsored researchers. As an example, NSF can offer different types of flexibilities in spending for salaries, reporting, changing canceled travel, different procurement requirements, and closeout as appropriate, as well as other different types of adjustments with appropriate concurrence from our program and the Division of Grants and Agreements. And so as an expectation, for example, it's really incumbent on our PIs to document carefully different changes, different expenses that are incurred due to setbacks, impacts of COVID, the pandemic. So for example, documenting having their institutions through their sponsored research office or authorized organizational representative maintain appropriate records to document those changes that will apply to their budget and scope. As Jen sort of alluded to in the previous slide, this will be taken into account if there is a need further down the line, depending on the maturity and the stage of a particular project, whether or not to consider potential supplemental funding requests or no cost extensions. So again, it's important to justify and document all those changes that occur. And as a reminder that we started out with, up-to-date information on general NSF policies can be found at the website listed there.
Okay, thanks. And then Frank.
Yeah, and this is just to remind you, just like Roberto just did, that the documentation goes into your annual report or project reports. You can find information about any of your awards through research.gov. So be sure to check there to find out when your annual report due dates are, the period of performance of your award, and also to identify who your program officer is in case you don't know. You can also look at your grant balances and see how you're doing and anticipate whether you need supplementary funding requested and how to go about doing that. So it's just a good resource that you can utilize.
And then Renee.
Just a few words about some of the things where we've received a number of questions: no cost extensions, salaries, and closeout dates. So no cost extensions continue to follow the policies that are laid out in the proposal and award policy guide, the PAPG, as we affectionately call it. Researchers can take a one-year no cost extension typically, but any more than that would require approval from your program officer. Active awards can continue to fund salaries, but again, as noted, please maintain records on and document any changes to your originally proposed cost allocations in your award. If you anticipate any sort of shortfall, please contact your program officer to discuss the impacts of that and options that you might have. Closeout, we have extended the closeout period for awards that were scheduled to end between November 30th, 2019 and April 30th, 2020 by 180 days to give people more time to complete their work or request no cost extensions or do other things that are needed in order to complete the work that they proposed. So again, please get in touch with your program officer to discuss any issues or questions that you might have with your current awards.
Great, thanks everybody so much. So right now, the rest of the time in this hour is going to be devoted to answering questions that people have. And just to run through a couple of things about how we can make the Q&A productive and orderly. So you can either type your question into the chat box or do the raise hand icon and we'll call on you and you can ask your question. I mean, if nobody's actively asking questions, you can also just go ahead and pipe up and ask yours. If you're calling in on the phone, please unmute yourself by dialing *6 so that we know that you're trying to ask a question. I think that's something I also forget when I'm calling into Zoom on the phone line sometimes. Yeah, and to access that raise hand icon, it's right next to your name or it's at the bottom if you click on the participants box on the participants app in the Zoom interface. And then just to remind everybody, it's please don't hesitate to shout and ask questions. I think everybody is really eager to be helpful and to answer questions and to work with everyone. So I'll stop sharing.
And a reminder that if you're on the phone, you can hit *9 to raise your hand if you're having trouble jumping in.
Okay. Any questions?
Don't be shy. We want to hear what's on your mind.
Yeah, it's always the first one.
I'll be brave and ask a question. Jason Briner here. Just curious, of course, you may not know the answer quite yet because you got to see how things shake out and we don't really know what the future is, but just curious with the delayed field work on Greenland this summer, is there any best guess about how that might impact field work for 21? Like if we propose to do work in 21, do you foresee that still taking place, or might that be impacted or bumped back, for example, by work that was originally scheduled for this summer?
I think it's kind of early to tell. We haven't started to assess the full impact of what was already scheduled for next year, and then also, what was bumped from this year. But I also think we'll aim to accommodate as much as possible if we're allowed to operate in a full capacity next year, and that's gonna time will tell. I think we'll be able, my best guess is we'll be able to operate in some capacity next year in Greenland. But again, that's all in really early stages of discussion. We've been working on making sure we can sustain Summit Station, and then just working with each of the PIs to get through this year. So
great, thanks, Jen.
Yeah, but happy to continue to talk with you about it, Jason. Go ahead, Simon.
Cool.
Yeah, and now we know, sort of the flow and the pattern of what's sort of in place now with quarantining and testing. When we started, we didn't actually know how to get people tested. So now we're a bit better equipped for that and quarantining. So even if things don't improve in the way that we hope they do, reasonably rapidly in the new year, if researchers are prepared to do the testing and quarantining path, we might be able to persuade the Greenland government that we at least would have control, just as Jen was talking about earlier. We're moving forward with the resupply of Summit for winter operations. So we've learned quite a bit, but I don't think anybody would put a reasonable bet on what next season would look like, because we just don't know.
Yeah, and I'll actually elaborate on that a little bit more. Our priority for Summit has been to sustain it so we can continue the observations, but I'm also viewing it as sort of a shakedown for next year to see where the bottlenecks are in terms of standing up any kind of a research season next year. We're working super closely with the government of Greenland and the US Embassy in Denmark and our military partners and everything to make this go really smoothly, and looking to see where the challenges are. And so we have managed to get in place quarantine protocols, testing protocols in the US, testing protocols in Greenland, isolation in Greenland, things like that. And we're running into now questions about, we're impacting Greenland's capability to test our people. So how do we mitigate that? And we're working on solutions for that for next spring. So we are doing this with an eye towards the future and using it to learn from.
That's great. It just occurred to me that we'll be groups like ours will be applying to Greenland for permits for fieldwork next summer. So maybe if there's some language we can use to talk about, COVID related procedures, protocols, testing or whatever, getting that embedded in those permits could be useful. I'm not sure if you guys would have any recommendations for wording we could use on that, but something we could work together on.
Absolutely. When you start getting ready to do that, talk with your contractor's project manager, and then we can talk as well, because then I think we could develop something that's consistent to include with each group. So absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
And then I think we have a question in the chat from Rebecca Woodgate. Can you please outline the current testing and quarantining requirements for going in the field, not just Greenland?
Frank, do you want to take that?
Sure, I can address it for Alaska and for vessels. So as of now, the Alaska rules are changing starting August 11th. They require a COVID test 72 hours before arrival in the state. And then that's followed by potential quarantine up to 14 days and additional testing if required. They were doing testing at the airport, and I think they're going to continue doing that for Alaska residents. But for non-residents, they're asking you to test before you travel. If that's not possible, they will potentially provide tests at your expense, and the quarantine would also be at the project expense. And we've been working with CPS to provide quarantine capabilities in Fairbanks before people travel to Toolik or to Utqiagvik. And we're also working with UIC Science to have follow-up quarantine in Utqiagvik. So that's kind of the situation in Alaska. With vessels, it's very similar. It's a 14-day quarantine with testing at the start and the end before boarding the ship, and then monitoring to hope that no COVID gets on board. We have been continuing with cruises. Our Mosaic participation has continued through the pandemic. We have a cruise that the participants left yesterday for Denmark, and they'll go into quarantine before boarding their ship for their cruise. So we anticipate that this will be pretty routine, at least for the rest of this season and probably into next season.
Thank you.
I think Jack Dibb has his hand up. Jack, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, this was just a follow-up to what Frank just said. So for the case of Alaska, you said that you need to be tested 72 hours before you arrive. But in some places, and certainly right around here, right, we're being required to be tested before going on campus. It takes us longer than 72 hours to get results in many cases. So is that the requirement, to have the results within the 72-hour window, or to have the test done?
Yeah, on the Alaska governor's COVID website, it basically lays out a whole series of decision points. If you come without a documented or evidence of a negative test, they'll want documentation that testing has taken place, and you'd be required to stay in quarantine until you can produce that test, and then potentially be tested again and continue that quarantine. So it really varies state by state. but I think NSF has set the bar equal or higher to the state requirements, and then also addressing community and regional requirements as well. So it's kind of a precautionary principle approach.
Okay, thanks. We have a question from Chris. Do you want to lower your hand and ask a question?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for this webinar and all the information you're providing here. My question is basically looking into all these disruptions that we're having, and my field work has, been completely delayed for 2020, a number of different field work campaigns, both NSF supported and other work. And that's going to go into impacting the 2021 campaign as well. So I'm looking for a little more discussion on how NSF sees these no-cost extension and cost extensions being provided. Normally, it's kind of expected that we would get a no-cost extension on a project under normal circumstances. Now we're looking at potentially needing, 2 years of an extension. And then also about the potential for supplemental funding. For my situation, I have a grad student that was recruited that started, is starting this fall, funded through NSF. And I wonder, now that they're not able to go out and conduct some of the research for their thesis, will there be potential supplemental funding for students on the back end of the project?
So maybe I can say a word. So I think there'll be, I think that the thing that you should do first is to keep good books, to make sure you know who you're paying for and where. And obviously we're going to need to consider supplemental funding. We're going to need to consider no cost extensions. It will be done on obviously a case-by-case basis, but we have obligations to, especially the grad students and those postdocs that are working on projects that aren't going out. So all those things are possible. And they're, we're going to have no cost extensions. We're going to have to look at the question about supplemental funds. So, the thing that I can ask you to do is to make sure you keep good documentation. That's what I would ask.
And if I can just jump in there, is to work with a program officer, bring them in maybe a little bit earlier than you would, because I'm making a lot of these calls right now, and sort of explore what you're thinking and what's possible. But Mark's answer is sort of the basic bit. I would say bring in the program officer so earlier and just sort of explore. I wonder if Joe Kittle wants to add anything here or not.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's great advice. In addition to having a conversation early with your program officer, just make sure also that you're engaging with your sponsored research office. And they should be well aware of what the documentation requirements are, as well as what they can and can't do under the specific flexibilities that have been offered by NSF related to COVID-19 related impacts.
This is Erica. I might add the fact that PIs do have considerable leeway in terms of reallocations to their own budgets. NSF does have some restrictions on things that cannot be done to budgets without prior approval, but PIs do have some latitude there, and that's always something you can discuss with your program officer as well.
Great, thanks a lot for those answers.
Do we have any other questions?
This is Elizabeth Thomas at the University of Buffalo. Sort of following on Chris's question, we have a project that was supposed to have its final field season this summer, and we ended up being able to coordinate with some locals on Baffin Island to be able to do some of the research and collect samples that we could not collect. And that incurred some expenses. And then we're hoping to go back next summer to actually complete that final field season. But we've already spent part of our final year logistics budget. And so the team has been wondering if there would be like additional funds to tap into to help support those logistics.
And well, this is specifically a logistics question you're asking, or are you also asking for science as well? Fund.
It's the logistics for this, because it's through the Canadian Polar Support Group. The logistics have all been in the main project budget. I don't know if that matters.
Yeah, I think the best thing to do would be to have a conversation with your program officer, and then they can pull one of us from RSL into the discussion as well. Right. Because there may be something that we can do to help out with that, since your logistics funds were all direct to grant, is what I'm hearing.
Great.
It's important to understand how the Canadians are handling it as well, whether they have the capacity to meet your needs in the next year.
Good point. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. We do have a question in the chat from Rebecca Woodgate. Is it clear yet how NSF OPP budgets will be affected by the COVID situation? Are NSF borrowing from the future to get through the situation now? And how will the funding of future proposals be impacted?
Oh, I'll take this one because I think it's coming my way anyway. So right now, the NSF program budgets really have not been affected by COVID. So, and I'm not seeing a clear pathway why they would be next year. How we spend, how we have spent the money in 2020, it's not quite done yet, but it's mostly done. Has been, obviously influenced by COVID. We've put less into the field than we had been planning to do. And so we're doing things like funding in advance some activities that we're anticipating next year. So I'm not sure to what degree we are really borrowing from the future to get through, the situation now. But I'm anticipating. So we do have a lot of flexibility about what we will fund in the future and what the logistics support will be. And Elizabeth's question and Chris's question, we can work with not just individuals, program officer to principal investigator, but sort of program wide about if we give a little bit here, can we take a little bit there to do the best for the overall program. And that's what I'm anticipating will happen in 2021, both calendar and fiscal 2021. Fiscal starts in October. I don't think we're in anything like a deep hole now. I don't think we're digging it. I think we have some flexibilities. Obviously, but as somebody else said, one of the other questions, there will be this sort of a little bit of a backlog. People who want to be in the field in 2020 will want to go in 2021. We anticipate that, but we might just sort of squeeze a little bit harder. We'll want to do it all. That's our sort of going in mode here. We really do want to support everyone. We want to support new grants too that we've made that have not yet had a field season. But we'll just have to sort of try to be more efficient and effective as we sort of come out of the hole that COVID has put us in. That's the not being able to do the field work hole, not a fiscal hole. I think we're going to be sort of okay fiscally. You know, your last part of the question is future proposals will be affected. So we may end up, if we do see a huge fire wave of work that we committed to do in 2021, and also work that we delayed from 2020, we may have to fund fewer proposals in 2021 in order to accommodate all demand, assuming that things open enough to accommodate that demand. And I like Jack's response. Yes, I have a crystal ball. It's just a little bit cloudy right now.
Thank you, Simon.
Any additional questions? This is your guys' time. You got all of them in one virtual room. It's rare.
Sure. This is Alan Pope from the International Arctic Science Committee. So I'm curious if NSF Arctic, or how the extent to which NSF Arctic is working with other funding agencies internationally to coordinate responses, to be able to provide, you know, are you working with folks in Alaska who maybe international researchers were hoping to work in Alaska, or plans for Greenland next year? Yeah, so I'm just wondering about the international coordination side of things.
Well, I can speak to some of that, and maybe Simon can add more. I mean, we've worked internationally with the Mosaic expedition. So we've coordinated with the State Department, with the German Federal Police and the Alfred Wegener Institute and health authorities to get people in and out of Germany and back and forth to the Polarstern. We've provided PPE for travelers that they could use during their trip to try to keep them as safe as possible. And I think that's worked very well and continues to work. We have had cancellations of some international shared activities on vessels. And that's really up to the country of origin of the researchers, how they handle the travel of their participants. But we share all those concerns. So I think we've addressed a number of international issues, and there's a whole spectrum of other issues probably there to be managed.
We do have several collaborations, projects in Greenland that are collaborations between US and Greenlandic scientists. And in some of those cases this year, the Greenlanders have really been able to pick up the slack where if the US participants haven't been able to deploy. So rather than cancel the entire research season, progress has been made in close collaboration between the two groups and having the Greenlanders take over the field component for this year. So that's been actually really nice to see.
Yeah, and I could even add that there is at Tulik Field Station in Ukjavik, there's providing remote access for researchers. So if people cannot travel, sometimes they can arrange with the staff to accomplish particular measurements or sampling that can be prioritized. So that's another way, and that's similar to what's being done at some of the Interact stations in other countries.
Okay, Simon or Renee, did you guys want to add anything, or I saw you guys off mute for a second?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. Jack?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with Frank and maybe Mike Abels regarding the situation in Alaska. I know that someone mentioned that a few people were going up to Utqiagvik and to Tulik, but they were quarantining in Fairbanks. And does the state have different sort of rules in different parts of it? I mean, is Fairbanks really okay with a lot of people coming from the lower 48, or just this, or is Anchorage more open than Fairbanks? Or, and I guess the long range question is, that I don't believe that it's an OPP funded project, but maybe from AGS, the whole alpaca field campaign that was tentatively supposed to happen in February in Fairbanks. I'm just curious if anyone has any insight into that.
So Jack, our procedure is to follow all state, regional, local, community restrictions, and really work with all those stakeholders to ensure that we're being responsible and the researchers are and the communities are all well informed. So the state regulations are kind of a baseline, and the procedures we put in place for Utqiagvik and Fairbanks and the Hall Road are a little bit more extensive than that. Like it's basically been do a 14-day quarantine with testing at the beginning and the end, because we want to make sure that we're not bringing COVID into any of the northern communities. We also encourage researchers to contact the communities and explain what they want to do and see if the community is willing to invite them or not, and be respectful of the feedback that you receive related to those kind of inquiries. So I think it's really the jury's out about what 2021 is going to look like, but I anticipate something very similar to what we're doing now, unless the situation changes significantly.
Hey, Frank, my only color commentary on the question is Tulik Field Station personnel and researchers are operating as essential employees, and research was designated by the governor as an essential workforce. So if you go on the websites, you see a couple sentences of what you need to do or can't do. In our case, we have, as Frank said, very documented employee workforce plans in place so we can operate safely. And that's why we're allowed to do it, and we're successfully doing it. Very detailed down to exactly where you can stop to go to the bathroom when you're traveling to Tulik, and how you will wash your hands and re-sanitize the truck. So it's a little different ballgame, but I think that's the opening with some of the other questions where we're researching now if some of these rules in a lot of cases do not apply to Tulik because we're essential employees and we have our own plan. And with that said, our own plan is actually more restrictive than what the state's mandating.
Yeah, and the state requires that anybody traveling independently files a protective plan with the state and gets approval. So there's a number of different steps in order to get approval of field work. And that includes getting that same kind of permission from your academic institution based on a plan that you put forward that outlines the safety steps and procedures that you're going to follow.
Great, thank you.
I'll just note that there's a really great comment from Luke Rainville in the comment section on this topic, talking about the experience of quarantining in Anchorage right now. So people might want to read that as part of this discussion. And then Kate, I'll let you go on to the next questions.
It would actually be great to read that comment aloud for folks on the phone.
Yeah, okay. I'll move through some of the comments that we had earlier, and then and once we get down to that comment, I'll take a second and read it out for folks that are on the phone. So I think actually Frank and Mike touched on Chris's kind of question with respect to travel to rural communities. The next one is for Jen. Can Jen talk a bit more about who supported the costs of collaboration this summer between the US and Greenlandic researchers for people who have been able to make progress on their summer work?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So for the most part, these are projects that were already set up as collaborations. So they, each of the research partners brought their own funding from their own entities. So the Greenlanders brought their own funding to the table, and they're using that or just rearranging the schedule of their projects to focus on their efforts this summer for progress to go forward. So So the original home entities in Greenland, I think, are supporting most of the costs. That said, we do have one example where we had a researcher who needed an instrument to be repaired in northern Greenland, and they weren't able to go up and do it. And so we had our contractor subcontracted with ASIAC, one of the research agencies in Nuuk, to go up and service the instrument, and that was successful also. So we have different models for that. And I think, as you know, John, proposals can be made to NSF to have international consultants or services provided, and you can get funding for that. But we don't support international PIs. They have to bring their own funding to the table.
Okay, thanks, Jen. I'm go ahead and read this comment from Luke Rainville right now for folks on the phone. So they are currently quarantining in Anchorage before going on the Healy for a cruise combining work for 2 ONR programs. The key point of this experience is the importance on insisting on strict isolation rules and testing, not just following the state guidelines. PIs to be proactive and to protect themselves and the communities we work with. We worked with the Coast Guard to make sure that we tested 2 times, mid and end of quarantine, and that everyone follows strict isolation guidelines. We arranged testing before travel. In Seattle, 48 hours is typical, so some people traveled from MA to WA to get tested. We will ride the ship back to Seattle to avoid transiting through North Slope and Alaskan communities. We make a significant investment to ensure mission success. 3-week fieldwork turned into 2+ months away. So we want to make sure that we all stay healthy and safe. It is great to see that the funding agencies are proactive. Okay, thank you for that comment.
And I'll just say that's pretty much the standard for the whole UNOLS fleet right now. Coast Guard's been involved in those discussions with the UNOLS vessels. Very similar process for Sikuliaq. And I would say that the procedures in place for the quarantine in Fairbanks for Toolik and Ukqiavik is very similar to that procedure as well.
We do have a question that's maybe not COVID. I'll read it out, and I guess you guys can decide whether or not this is a good space to answer it. How's OPP finding the change from one annual deadline to no deadlines? As a researcher, I find it great, but I was wondering how NSF was finding it working out operationally, and if OPP is going to continue doing it.
Oh,
Simon?
Well, maybe we'll let Simon. Do you think this is an appropriate place to comment on that?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about it. It's an opportunity. We have 7 minutes left. So we're finding it pretty good because one of the outcomes of it is it has dropped the proposal pressure on some of the programs. And as a response of that, we've been able to actually reduce some of the constraints we put on the research community for proposing to our programs, particularly in the Arctic Natural Sciences program. It was a fairly constrained program maybe 5 years ago, in part to manage proposal pressure, but now we took those constraints off. So that I think is good. There have been some program officers, some PIs who have complained about it. But we haven't really done a study of what the negative impacts have been. I think some people like the deadlines. There was a particular program officer associated with Mosaic who nearly teared up when I told him that the deadlines had gone away because he was working so hard to get people to submit on a particular timeline for Mosaic, right? And I said, no, we're getting rid of the deadlines. I thought he was going to be happy, but he was like you guys must be mad. But anyway, so I think generally speaking, people are happy, but some people aren't. Some people work much better to a deadline, and that sort of has to be recognized. So can we have the community present their own deadlines to their own subsections or something like that? It is also, I believe, a NSF-wide effort looking at the impacts, because NSF generally is moving towards fewer deadlines. We still have a deadline for navigating the new Arctic. So there are places where deadlines seem to make sense. But generally, we're pretty happy that we don't have deadlines in our programs.
Simon, can I say a word about this? And
yes, of course.
All right. So just from a personal perspective on this, I think some of the questions that folks have asked in the past is what's happened to the quality? Has the quality gone up because people have the opportunity to take more time to write a proposal? At first, I thought the answer, or what I saw, was that it didn't, but I think it is actually going up at this point. I think we're seeing better proposals. From a program point of view, it allows us to have a little bit more time to find expert reviewers. It relieves some of the pressure on the community of exactly one time per year hitting everybody with a request for a review. And the other positive aspect of it is because it, again, relieves a little bit of the pressure, it gives us a little bit more flexibility to fund a greater number of proposals, because you're looking to how you can do things, and you have some time that we didn't always have before. Everything before was happening at once for all of the proposals for the year. And so I think this has relieved, this relief in the pressure, I think, has been, for the most part, at least from my perspective, it's been very positive.
Well, thanks,
yeah.
Mark. I was gonna say we have about 3 minutes left. I know a lot of the NSF program officers have a hard stop at 3 o'clock. Maybe I'll ask COVID related question, and then if not, I'll hand it over back to Liz. Okay, great. Thanks everybody. Liz, let you close it out.
Thank you.
Great, thanks everyone. Thank you to everyone from NSF for taking the time to answer these really good questions, and to everyone for participating and asking these great questions. The recording of this will be online on the event page. I will drop the link in the chat right now. So if you know folks who wanted to join but couldn't make it, you can share that with them. It'll also be on our YouTube channel. If you don't yet have an account on IARPIC Collaborations, I do really encourage you to sign up at iarpiccollaborations.org. That'll give you access to our collaboration team, so you can join monthly meetings and get to know what else is going on in the IARPIC space. And you can also follow us on social media. So thanks everyone, and we hope to see you at a webinar in the future.